This is Leisha Holmes, and I'm your host on the Recruitment Podcast. And I'm thrilled and honoured, although we have a global community, and wherever you're listening in the world right now, maybe you're sat on a beach somewhere, my heart and soul is in Manchester. I am a Mancunian, proud Man City fan, and I love getting guests on the show who are also fellow Mancunians. And this next guest will hopefully need no introduction to the Manchester community. But for those who are not yet familiar, this is Zack Georgiou, and he's the owner and founder of Chroma Recruitment and also fellow podcast host of NorthWestify. So welcome to you today. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. It feels very, very strange being on the other end. And it didn't start very well with you saying, yeah, you're a blue and I'm a big red. So, but
it's fine.
Yeah,
but you know, it's absolutely, the thing is, and I know you'll probably think, yeah. I've actually followed them since 91 when they went down to the second division at the time. I love football and I'll sit and watch any match. And if United are playing against another team apart from City, I'll support United. I just love football. I love Marcus Rashford.
As long as the city's thriving, that's
honestly, that is, I genuinely, my boyfriend's a United fan and he can't believe how much I love United. I still love United. I love Rashford. I think he's brilliant. I love your current manager, as we record this in March 2023. Who knows when it goes out? You just don't know. But no, tell us a little bit about your business and why we're so focused on Manchester. I know we're going to come on to it. Talk a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Yeah, so I've been in recruitment since 1996. I've been around for a long time. I was involved in several other businesses over the years. And in 2015, I decided that I was going to set my own up solely. So I've been heavily involved at very senior level within other businesses, but I decided that I was going to do my own thing. So during that sort of phase of, left the business that you've helped grown and that whole period of, sort of what do I do? How do I do it? Etc., etc. I then thought to myself, right, okay, well, I'd watched a few of my friends and they'd set up recruitment businesses and their businesses were set up very much with a focus on a very specific discipline and maybe going global with it and not moving outside. And I think there was very much a viewpoint several years ago that ultimately you've got to go down one specialism and that's the best way forward. There's too many general recruiters, but just couldn't nail down that specialism. And what that made me do was think, well, actually, I'm born and brought up in Manchester. I'm a man through and through. I love what's going on with the city. I've done tech recruitment and engineering recruitment throughout my time. Why don't we specialize on doing general tech and engineering, well, actually tech recruitment at that time in Manchester, and just have that local knowledge, and it wasn't sticking it in Google and trying to work out how long it takes to take from Charlton to get to Piccadilly or to St. Peter's Square. It was actually, I know how long that'll take because that's a bit of a nightmare, or etc. etc. So that's hence why we sort of went down that route. So that's the reason that we went in there as a local recruiter, and that's how we set up Chroma initially.
I love it. And actually, I'm nodding away for lots of reasons, not least because my own business, my day job as a rec to rec, is I just do Manchester. And in fact, even before we came on this call, I had a new business in Leicestershire approach me, and I'm like, we just don't do that area. And I've never really thought of it in that way, but actually, like you say, you just know somewhere, you know what the journey is going to be like, even though if you went on Google Maps and said, oh, it's only 12 miles, that's a nightmare, 12 miles. You're not going to drive that. So but actually it means you get to know who the movers and shakers are. You build up your local knowledge, and not least now that obviously, we are all out and about networking physically again, you can make it in the community by being out there. And I think it's an interesting perspective because we've had, you might not have listened to some of the previous guests, but we've had guests from all over the globe. And there's a general consensus because of globalization, you should be thinking, expanding into America and doing Australia and doing Dubai and everything. But actually, sometimes if you really niche down on your local area, and that's why I wanted to get you on, and how you've done that, why that is actually also a benefit to do that. So, just talk a little bit in terms of how you see that approach rather than having specialists, but going into international territories.
Well, I think you're still doing the same thing, but you're still having specialists.
Yep.
But you're having it within a particular region. That being said, Leisha, I think it's also important to get across the fact that as your business evolves, we're starting to push out more now as we're getting bigger, but you have to have a start point. And the evolution of the business and the success of the business, yes, it might be from doing that. However, we are starting to move out. That's something that is, I would probably say, you've got to start somewhere.
Yes.
Okay. And if you start that, you're going to do the same as everybody else, but somebody's maybe doing it purely on a global scale, and that's all they're doing. What we've done is we've turned around and said, right, we're going to have specialists that will do skills. So we've got a software development team, we've got a mechanical engineering team, we've got a software engineering and a software development separate, because obviously engineering and development different things. But they're now, the engineering team are now moving more and more across the UK and so on. But there's still specialists within it. And then I think one of the biggest differences is and what happened with us is we ended up with having a specialist team, but then we also had a delivery team. So because we're very focused on the Northwest, clients would ask us, well, actually, and I know you've found us some great developers, but we do us a favor, will you find us a PM, or will you find us a PM, a BA or whatever. And then before you're delivering lots of different skills in there. So it's really weird doing it yourself, because I'm all hands on. I'm very Greek.
It's all right. I'm very Jewish mother when I look back on it. Because I'm often asked to be a guest, and I think you're right, when it's yourself in the hot seat, you're just a bit more, and it's good. I like the energy, but if people are listening, he's basically flapping his hands around, which is really lovely. No, I do agree with what you're saying, and I think, I wanted to invite you on for that reason, but the other reason is that you are an absolute shining example of a business that has found, and this is where we want you to share your secret formula of hiring and training trainees and bringing new people through, because I think where I'm such a huge advocate for our industry, I'm renowned in Rec to Rec for actually doing the opposite and placing very experienced people. The lifeblood of our industry will come from the new people coming through. And actually our listeners, you'll love to know, Zack, is we get a lot of leaders listening because it's based on feedback, but we get a lot of people who are starting out their recruitment career journeys. So I think this next bit will be really interesting. So when you're hiring and when you've looked around your business at the successful people you've brought through, what qualities have you looked for, and what, generally speaking, do you think makes a good trainee to become a high performer in recruitment?
Well, so I probably dossed around as a youngster. I wasn't somebody who was very career focused. I wasn't very academic. It wasn't my bag. I was very much a social person. That was just what I was about. Everyone's different, but I always had a desire to be successful. And for me, success was never about money. So I've heard lots of people talk very much about, I want to make money. When somebody turns around and says to me, what are your key motivators? And the first thing is money. I'm always turned off by that, because I'm a great believer in, money becomes a byproduct of being successful at what you do. I'm
clapping in because I agree. Carry on.
So when I interview somebody, I only ever interview on attitude, and I'm always looking at the core traits that somebody has. So, are you family orientated? Why are you family orientated? Why are you driven? So, lots of sports people are driven because they enjoy it, number one, but they're driven a particular way. So I'm not saying that's a sport person necessarily.
No.
I think it's just an attitude thing. So my view was always one of, I always wanted to be the best at what I did, and I'd always work on that basis. And recruitment being an industry which is very fortunate, and you need to respect how fortunate you are to potentially earn some very, very good money off the back of it, just means it becomes a byproduct. So in relation to my views on what makes a good trainee, it's somebody who has a desire to be successful in whatever format that is, and has an open mindset to understand that the only person that can hold themselves back is themselves, full stop. And that probably comes a little bit from the fact that there's probably times in my career where I probably held myself back and didn't realize what I could actually achieve. And whilst I'm on that, I'd also like to mention that our actual company values are teamwork, commitment, humility, and respect. And I think all of those are things that I think I'd look for an individual, particularly around the humility piece. Because I think when you can build an environment that everyone is humble, and yet they still want to win and be successful, and yet they behave appropriately when they are winning and they are being successful, then you've got a really good chance. You've never smashed it, because we'll never smash it, because that's just our nature. But you've got a really good chance. And every single person that I interview and every single person that I bring in, I'm just constantly exploring what does success look like to them? Why does it look like? And not, I want to make as much money as I can.
Yeah. Do you know, honestly, I mean, by the time this goes out, I bet we'll have done about 175 episodes. I've never, ever discussed humility before. And it's actually made me go goosebumpy, because I think if more industry leaders took on board what you were saying and used that as a measure of whether somebody's going to be successful, whatever their driver of success is, actually going back a step, if we were all a little bit more humble in terms of what we're doing and seeing that we're taking human beings on a journey, I think we'd actually be a better regarded industry externally. So I think I really applaud you for striking a value that I think doesn't really get talked about very much, and that's definitely setting you apart, Zack.
I just think it's incredibly valuable that people are, you just to finish off on the question. The other thing is as well, for me, so with the level of experience that I've got, the years of experience, I could probably have gone down the route of maybe getting 6 or 7 high performers, paying them really, really well, and trying to make as much money as I possibly can do. However, my personal, don't get me wrong, I still need to do well. Don't get me wrong, I still need to do money. I've got so much more I want to achieve in my life. And we are by no means a business that has made it financially yet. We're still on that journey, which, by the way, I'm enjoying far more than what I've ever enjoyed.
Good.
Because the journey is the exciting part, and not just on the destination.
Yes.
But I genuinely care and love seeing people being promoted. For me, watching somebody go from nothing to being a team leader or being a manager or growing their business and seeing the fruits of their success is just amazing. Absolutely amazing.
I can just see the energy in you, that is actually what drives you. And I think, you're right about people's personal drivers and motivations. And I've always, even when it was kind of the norm to ask somebody what they're motivated to, and they go money, money motivated, I've always been, that's why I had to pause you to applaud you. I think that is always going to be the byproduct of any person that's in a target-led environment. The money is your reward for doing your job well. So I love and applaud everything that you've said there. And I think that, we have a duty as leaders, and if you're listening now as a leader, to keep elevating our industry. And I think, and I see you, and I'm not saying this in a disingenuous way, but I think you're actually advocating a much kinder, calmer industry, which again, I think we're all responsible for creating, rather than this kind of Wolf of Wall Street, sales, money, sales, deals. And actually that's really not what drives us.
Totally. And I think, going back to the point, I think because my mindset was never about the money, and it was always about being a success, and then money became a byproduct of it. It's exactly the same. I buzz off watching people develop their career. But equally, I'm on top of the ladder. So the byproduct of that is those people are going to be successful. They're going to do better. I'm going to do better.
Absolutely. It's self-fulfilling.
And there's 2 final things I'd say on it. And one is, if you don't wake up in the morning as a leader of people and be privileged by the fact that you're leading a bunch of people, then you shouldn't be a leader, full stop, because it is a privilege doing that, number one. And number 2, you're only as good as those people around you, particularly when you scale. There's many, many leaders that think it's about them. And that is, for me, as you scale your business, you are only as good as those people around you. And actually, the best thing is that most of them are actually probably better than you.
Servant leadership right there, guys. Servant. And if you're listening to this and you're not a leader and you're aspiring to be one, and you're not being made to feel the way Zack is making me feel, you should want to work for a leader like that, then you need to think about where you're working. Now, you have the privilege as a podcast host yourself to interview people all around the tech industry. Tell us a little bit about your pod, but also what's happening specifically in the tech space that we can maybe either learn from or just as a matter of interest.
Okay, so I think I'll start off with my podcast because I love doing the podcast. It's really good. So we started doing a podcast because one of the individuals in the business, we wanted to do something different, and there wasn't loads of people doing podcasts at the time. There was probably only 2 or maybe a few more, but certainly certainly within my sort of circle, I could only see 2 or 3 local agencies that were doing that. And one of the teams said, "Oh, you should do a podcast." And I was like, "Nah, it's talking about." And they were like, "No, you should do a podcast. Honestly, they're really good people." Listen, I was like, "Nah." Anyway, so I thought, okay, fine, let's do it. Let's try it. Why not? So what I decided to do was I didn't want to do just a recruitment podcast. I wanted to do something that was sort of within tech and digital as well, which was within our market. And I wanted to, 1, give something back, 2, talk with authority on the subject, and 3, give others an opportunity to profile themselves and their businesses and maybe do a little bit of networking for themselves. So that was the sort of how it sort of came about. At the same time, I remember, John Cleary, who I'd met just before I set up Chroma. And John and I had been out together, and then we were getting the train together because he was on the same line as me, and we'd get the train nearly every single day, and we got to know each other quite well, and we started chatting, and I mentioned about this podcast thing, and he was like, "Yeah, brilliant, why don't we just do it together, because I'm a techie and you're a recruiter, it's perfect. We can get techies on, and I can talk tech, and you can talk about Manchester, and you can talk commercially, and so on and so on." So that's how it spiraled. And then from there, we started doing it. And, as you probably know, the first time you do the first one, you're like, "Oh my God, my voice, I can't hear it. I can't hear myself. No. And then my kids, one day when I was walking around listening to it with my speaker on my phone, my kids were like, "Daddy, are you on the radio?" So I'm like, "Well, it's not really a radio, it's a podcast, but yeah, it's me speaking to them." And they were like, "Wow, you're famous." And I was like, "Right, I need to keep this up, don't I?" So that's sort of how the podcast came about. And, it's great. I mean, it's getting harder at times just because I'm so busy as the business has grown to go out there and get guests. And I'm sure you know what that's like. I mean, we talked about this 3 months ago and you booked it in 3 months or so ago.
Takes real organisation and planning. But I think I always blow people's minds that I just do it once a month and then just do 6 or 7 in a day. Right. So it's the only way I can fit it in, because otherwise there's absolutely no way it would happen. And if I didn't do it like that and book it like that, I think it would peter into nothing. And I just dare do that, because I like you, everything that you've said word for word, including hearing my own voice. But the difference is the reaction of 2 teenage girls was, "Oh, get that off." And actually, because my younger daughter does sometimes get involved, she does a bit of internship for us, and occasionally we do get her to do a bit of sound bites off it, and she's like, she has to sit and watch me on YouTube. You can imagine her eyes must be rolling out the back of her head. But I do agree with you, and I think, if you're listening to this now and you haven't yet jumped on the podcast bandwagon as a host yourself, obviously you're listening to this, so you must be you must be a listener. There are advantages, because what you're doing is you're speaking to thought leaders in your sector. You're elevating your own knowledge as a recruiter by speaking to people, and I do think it's a good way to connect a community. I think my caveat is that you can't just dip in and out once a month and get a show here, a show that. I think you need to have a strategy. That's my caveat with it. I think you have to stick to it and create a momentum.
Yeah, and I think, like I say, I think we're just about to start recording again over the next couple of weeks and stuff like that. And like you say, I think you absolutely have to do that. I think I just had one other thing. I don't know if you mentioned it, because you mentioned quite a few things there. But one thing that I also found about it, and what I loved about it, was how you can educate yourself so much more as well, because you're talking to people and they're saying things, and you're thinking to we've had different guests on, from big business in Manchester to small business in Manchester to medium-sized business in Manchester, and we've talked from topics from Brexit right the way through to Manchester being this tiny little village 20 years ago and being not as cool and all those type of things, and how cool it is now, and then the talent challenges and the tech stuff. So we talked about loads of stuff. However, in addition to that, we've also spoke to people that have talked about what it's like running a very, very successful, so not comms business, but a section within the business that's all about communications, how they become the number one company to work for in the UK. And it was all built on communication. And, you know, others that were showing us other ideas of things that they did, which is like, wow, that's absolutely amazing. And some of the engineering clients we've had on recently, some of the stuff they're doing is mind-blowing.
Wow,
So,
I can't even imagine. Can't even but you're getting to see that and feel that. And I think that's such an important point that you've made. I think that when you are a host within your industry, whether you're listening to this and you're placing aerospace engineers or you're placing chefs, whatever it is, you actually get to know so much first-hand knowledge before anybody else. So then when you're then speaking to your clients, your customers, your candidates, you actually can pull on so much more detail and real life information because you're taking that from your guests. So I hear what you're saying totally.
We're always learning, aren't we, at the end of the day? And if we're not, then we've got problems. So.
Yeah. Going back to what you said about when you're taking on trainees, growth mindset, it's got to be around that mindset. It really does. Absolutely. How has it been on the other side of the desk then? Would you do this again?
Would I do it again? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
it's been great.
I've enjoyed. I enjoyed the whole conversational bit, and you know, you've probably touched on a number of topics that probably float my boat. So
good.
It's really, really good.
And including Man United, obviously. I mean, this is basically we as a podcast, we do ask for feedback, and one of the things that people like is the fact that it is quite we do short, punchy episodes. I always jokingly say, because I've got the attention span of Dory, you know, I just like 20 minutes, and even Stephen Bolt, I have to do it in little piece size. But also the fact that we do get real people on talking about real life stuff. And you've just been such high energy. I knew you'd be fantastic. So thank you. And we'll make sure when we share the post that there's a link to your pod, because there'll be plenty of people that, based on what you've said, I'm going to go and listen, because actually that's really interesting. Flying cars. Are we talking about flying cars yet?
No, we're talking. Have a listen. The one that the engineering one I think you should listen to is the Exergy one.
The what? Exergy?
Exergy.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll all be your listener numbers will go up on your analytics on that one. Zach, thank you so much for joining us on the Recruiters Recruitment Podcast.
Cheers. Thank you.